Welcome to Health Stealth Radio, where we move away from the mundane to gather insights from the shadows of enterprise and patient cybersecurity. Yes, we surely believe that traditional themes like endpoint software and zero trust are critical, but given massive advances in AI, remote and wearable device hacking, and data hostage negotiators, there's a much darker side to cybersecurity, and not everyone is quite willing to talk about it in public. Health Stealth Radio will thrive on these topics and encourage fireside spats to debate them. Here's your host, Frank Cutitta.
Hello, my name is Frank Cutitta, host of Health Stealth Radio. We're famous for looking into the shadows of healthcare technology, cybersecurity, and today I'm pleased to have Lisa Gallagher, who's a colleague of mine, and we've crossed each other's paths in previous lives as well, to join me today. Lisa will introduce herself, but she is the National Security Advisor for CHIME, which is a new position. Lisa, does that need Senate approval? National Security Advisor?
No, it
okay.
doesn't.
I'm sorry. I forgot. I forget what show I was on. Okay, so Lisa, just a little bit about your background and how you wandered into CHIME, as much like I did, and what you'll be doing here.
Well, great. Thanks, Frank. And I'm really happy to be here talking with you about cybersecurity for the sector and also my work at CHIME. My background, I'm an electrical engineer by background. I've been doing cybersecurity for close to 40 years. I started out as a systems engineer and got into cyber relatively early in my career, working with NSA and NIST and Department of Defense. Worked as a systems engineer for years and years and years. And then I actually went to work for another of our peer not-for-profit groups in healthcare, where I was a cybersecurity subject matter expert. Did that for about 10 years. I also worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers as a managing director in their cyber practice and retired from there a few years ago. And I have been hanging around since then, working as a consultant with clients across a number of sectors. And when I was entered into discussions with CHIME about coming to work back in the healthcare sector and focusing their work on cybersecurity for the benefit of their members. So here I am today. I've been here about 6 months. That's a little bit on my background.
So what do you? I mean, let's look at the past year, which really has been a phenomenal year in healthcare IT, and especially as it related to cybersecurity. How do you see the landscape being different than maybe just the last 12 months? Maybe you should go back a little bit further, but I think there have been some dramatic things in terms of cybersecurity landscape that have gotten CHIME to the point of actually formalizing a national security advisor.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot going on in the last year, and I'm going to try to summarize that, but there's a lot to parse here, so bear with me for a bit. I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about an event that happened this past February, which was a ransomware attack on a company called Change Healthcare, which is a clearinghouse for medical billing and medical payments. And they experienced a complex, protracted ransomware attack and an outage for a period of time that was associated with that attack. And, the effects of that were profound. I mean, first of all, it affected a large portion of the provider organizations in this country. It brought medical billing and medical payment to a standstill for those organizations, and other types of processes were affected as well. I mean, an example of that is pre-authorizations, which delayed medical procedures. So, a big impact on our provider organizations. It paralyzed the cash flow of all of these organizations. And, estimates are that it represented about a fifth of the U.S. economy at the time. It potentially compromised like 85 million patient records and cost the industry, both Change Healthcare itself and other organizations, billions and billions of dollars. recovery from that event is still in progress as we talk now, and it may be months or years until we understand the final toll of that. But it's not just the high profile nature of that attack that makes me bring it up first here when you ask me that question. I would say it's the important learnings or takeaways from that event that we're still processing, but they're very significant. So I would break those into two categories. One is for the provider organizations that were affected, and the other category is the learnings and takeaways for the healthcare ecosystem at large, right? So for provider organizations, I think they really need to take a look at their reliance on third parties for services around business and clinical operations. Try to identify where they have single points of failure. So only one organization doing that service for them. And perhaps try to leverage multiple suppliers in that area for redundancy, right? I mean, that's one thing we learned is for payment processing, they had one provider, one service provider, they went down, everything came to a standstill. So maybe look at where you have single points of failure and aim for redundancy. Another thing is that they really need to finalize the preparations of their business and clinical event recovery operations, their continuity of operations procedures, and test them thoroughly now for an extended loss of services that could be happen because of a third-party service provider that has a cyber attack. So those are two big areas for provider organizations. And, for the healthcare ecosystem at large, that again, it was one organization that was a single point of failure for almost all of our provider organizations. So there's a couple of key takeaways there that I think CHIME will be working on, as will the rest of the healthcare sector. So in terms of those single points of failure, as an industry and maybe working together with government, we might want to identify where those single points of failure are and try to help eliminate them through general awareness that they exist, that they're out there. If you just contract with one, there's a danger that you might not have those services for an extended period of time, and sort of create an environment for redundancy, whether it's encouraging other providers in that space or reminding our healthcare providers to contract for redundancy, right? I think also, in terms of regulation, in terms of the requirements on those third-party service providers, Change Healthcare is a clearinghouse, and therefore it was covered by HIPAA and other regulations. But there may be other organizations out there that have healthcare data that really are not covered by current regulation. So when we try to identify those single points of failure and we discover maybe they're not covered by regulation, we could either try to extend regulation to them or find ways to subject them to additional scrutiny when it comes to cyber practices, right? We need to know as individual organizations as the industry as a whole that they have sound cybersecurity practices. Now, there's a couple of ways to handle that. As I mentioned, extend regulation, that current regulation, or maybe create some net new regulation. But also we can encourage providers to have sound contracts that require evidence of, cybersecurity practices
Right.
in their third-party providers. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of cumbersome review of evidentiary information related to a contract. It doesn't always make its way to the security organization, right? The security group. But it is one thing we can do. And then, looking at how do we subject them to additional, regulatory scrutiny in terms of basic security practices.
Right.
So
some of these, just to your point on contracts, from what I've seen in some of the conferences we've done, some of these contracts have been pretty flimsy in terms of the reparations that have to be done, like cybersecurity breach, and we have to do something within 48 hours or something like that, which is sort of outlandish considering what damage could be done in 48 hours.
it's also, how do we know that our third-party service provider actually has sound cybersecurity practices in
Right.
place? We don't.
Right.
So it's
CrowdStrike, for example. Right?
yeah, CrowdStrike, for example. But it's a complex area to solve,
Mhm.
and I think the hardest thing of all would be individual provider organizations, each trying to solve that on their own. So I think
Mhm.
as a sector and an ecosystem, and together with the government, we need to look for solutions there. So, I've taken quite a bit of time on this specific ransomware attack, but I do think it's illustrative of the events of last year and also the types of learnings we have to take away from those experiences, right?
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, it is a Y2K of sorts,
Yes.
along with CrowdStrike. So, I mean, those the change and CrowdStrike will be brought up over and over again over the years as the day the music died, in some ways. We have a very talented government affairs team at
Yeah.
Chime, and
And,
I'm curious how you liaise with them in terms of the work you're doing as National Security Advisor.
okay, yes, Frank. And we have a great public policy team at Chime, and I interact with them quite frequently. They focus on all aspects of policymaking at the administration, HHS, and Congress. They convene members all the time to discuss public policy at all levels, not just
Hmm.
cyber, get input. They publish resources, and they actually go and meet with public policy officials so that we have dialogue with them, and through them, our members can have direct input into the process. Of course, cyber is one of the top topics that they deal with.
Hmm.
And in fact, before the election, we saw draft legislation in the Senate to address additional cybersecurity requirements for providers. And we even anticipated the release of a HIPAA 2.0 by the administration.
Hmm.
So we don't know, given the results of the election, we don't know where these efforts will go, but our public policy team is already tracking the happenings and discussions around in anticipation of the change of administration in January. So I would say that both Congress and the incoming administration clearly have cyber in their sights. And it's not just for healthcare, but across all critical infrastructure sectors, right? So, the public policy team has already got some resources out on this topic. Um,
Hmm.
they have a recorded webinar on what to expect for public policy with the new administration. And then actually, together with your DHI, there's a published article in the last couple of days that covers their thoughts on the upcoming public policy
Right.
landscape. And for our members, I would strongly recommend that you consider getting involved with those public policy efforts, because you can stay up to date on what affects your organization, and be involved in the convening activities
Absolutely.
and the advocacy efforts they have, so that we can, as an industry, have an influence on how we get regulated. And as I said, cyber is one of their number one topics. So I will be personally involved, as will our members, our CIOs, and our CISOs in those activities.
And they'll be on the show next week, so
Oh, great.
we'll have that team coming on. We waited a little bit till things, to the extent that they'll ever settle down a little bit more after the election. But we'll be getting their prognostication next week. So Chime has two major constituencies, one being the providers, the other being the foundation members or
Correct.
vendors. And I think you put them under the umbrella of the ecosystem, which they're a very important part of. So I think it's pretty clear that you'll be working with the provider organizations to offer advice. How do you see your role working with the foundation members, the vendors or uh, non-providers, if you will, that will need a national security advisor?
Yeah, so for me, the other members include vendors, but also consultants.
Hmm.
And I'm a longtime consultant.
Hmm.
You know, vendors and consultants play a very key role in solving these problems, right?
Hmm.
Of course, CIOs and CISOs look for vendor products to deploy in their IT environments that will, either prevent or monitor for cyber attacks.
Hmm.
Those vendors also have consulting services that allow them to help an organization implement the tools properly and leverage them for maximum benefit.
Hmm.
I think as a convener, as CHIME as a convener, we like to convene those organizations together. And it's
Hmm.
basically a discussion of the current challenges and a problem solving activity, right? So, what are we
Hmm.
seeing? What are organizations actually encountering? And how do we address those problems with deployment of tools, with the advice and services of consultants working together? This is like every day is a battle in a larger war, and we need everyone at the table. I think um, we have a tremendous amount of involvement and support from our foundation members, and they are a very valuable part of solving these challenges.
So you're active still in the consulting business, as you said, and you've had a deep experience in the past. Without getting into confidential information, what are some of the things, the more shocking things that you see out there? We've talked about telecommunications and things like that, some of the work that you've done, and now and in the past. What are some of the underestimations that you see that the kinds of clients that you have in terms of
Well,
cybersecurity?
yeah, I would say of the more recent and shocking in your terms developments is really the involvement of nation states.
Hmm.
So China, Russia,
Hmm.
other countries who support and fund cyber attack activities, whether it's individuals or what we call gangs
Hmm.
that conduct attacks on an ongoing basis. We also see them in terms of advanced persistent threats, which means they are in an organization's network for an extended period of time, and we may
Hmm.
not know why. That sometimes means planning for a future event, but also it means, in some cases, espionage.
Hmm.
So there's information that might be valuable to that government that they're looking to exfiltrate. And they stay in the network for a long time. They gather that information, um, and we don't know what they're using it for. And sometimes it doesn't even look like a cyber attack. So, um, where we used to see it in terms of financial benefit, it's
Hmm.
also now becoming to the benefit of a nation state actor.
Hmm.
And
Activism.
we don't always understand all of the threat scenarios. So that's an area that we have to study. As a consultant, I work with my clients on exactly that. Why are they there? What are they trying to do? And what is the impact to you, to your home government, to governments in the region? So it's a very complex type of threat scenario, and it's impacting almost every sector in the U.S. economy, including healthcare.
That's great. I want to mention sort of a shameless plug. Lisa is heading up our State of Cybersecurity and Healthcare event in January. So just want to allude to the fact that we have some interesting characters coming in.
We do. The event is in January, on January 21st, from 1 to 4:30 Eastern Time. And we do have quite a cast of characters. First of all, we'll have Dr. Ron Ross from NIST. He's going to be talking about some standards and guidance around defensive architectural measures for IT architectures. And he's got a great guidance document that I think will provide some potential solutions in terms of architecting your IT to prevent cyber attacks. We have a member of the cyber branch of the FBI who will be addressing the cyber threat forecast from the perspective of the FBI for 2025, and also breach prevention guidelines that they have. And then finally, another interesting speaker is Andrew Carr, who has served in the past as a ransomware negotiator and incident response expert. And he's going to be talking about the art and science of data hostage negotiation. So, what does that mean? That means when someone has a ransomware attack and a ransom is requested for the release of data, how do you determine whether or not to pay the ransom? And then, if a ransom is going to be paid, how does that happen? How does the discussion happen? How does the amount negotiation happen? And the involvement of third-party negotiators in that process. So that should be fascinating as well, Frank.
I think it will. And we were just at a conference where it was, we had a bunch of people that were involved in security. And a year ago, they would say, absolutely not. We're not paying a penny to these people.
Right.
And anonymously and ashamedly, sometimes this year was that we've all paid it to a certain extent, or we would consider it, considering the value. So the world is shifting where data hostage negotiators are becoming a part of the critical part of the team. So Lisa, just to wrap up, if I am a CHIME member, how do I, whether it be on the foundation side or on the provider side, how do I avail myself to your services? And surely, if you aren't a CHIME member, here's a good reason to join. So you have a national security advisor as part of your membership fee. How do they engage with you?
Right. So, I mean, one of the reasons they created this position is because we need to have a much more in-depth interaction and dialogue amongst our members. And so, in addition to a lot of the resources we currently provide, we're going to really be focusing on our role as a convener. And so what do I mean by that? Well, our CIOs and our CISOs, they can read the news. They understand there's a lot going on, and they have their internal teams are focusing on threats and threat scenarios and vulnerability mitigation, right? They work every day to put in place preventative measures, policies and procedures and tools that'll help them address that, but they can't do that in isolation, right? They need information. And one of the things they love to have is interaction with their peers. And that's an area that we can facilitate. We can provide them a safe place where they can share information. What types of information? Well, general information on current threat vectors and what they're observing, what their teams are finding. But also in a much more timely fashion on events that are unfolding today, yesterday, tomorrow, right? They can share what they're seeing in terms of indicators of compromise and tactics of threat actors. They can share about common patterns they're seeing. And also importantly, the tools and approaches that are actually working for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, we had this challenge and we did this in response, and it seems to be working. A really good example of that, Frank, is we've seen a number of social engineering attacks against the help desk function at a lot of provider organizations. We've already been sharing information about how that's actually happening, how they stop it, and then actually what kinds of tools and resources are helping them to prevent it from happening in the future. So really, I think you'll see us really stepping up in terms of convening our members to interact with each other, members of the government, members of, other resources, the Health ISAC, NIST, et cetera. In that way, sharing information that will help them on a very timely basis.
That's great. So if you're a CHIME member, I would suggest that you contact your membership contact liaison within the organization, and they will connect you with Lisa, or will be able to provide her direct contact information again on the web. So as part of the program. I think this is great. It was a great intro. We know that Lisa is a prolific writer, and she is on the stage and screen quite a bit too, and she will be doing so with CHIME and having a very close relationship with Health Stealth Radio, which I hope to get her more involved in the months ahead. So in the meantime, thank you so much, Lisa. It was fantastic, and look forward to the next in the series.
Thank you very much, Frank. I'm looking forward to it as well. And come join us at CHIME.
Thank you for joining us today in the shadows for this episode of Health Stealth Radio with Frank Cutitta. If you like the program, please be sure to share your comments on our social media sites. or feel free to contact us with suggestions for new and stealthy show themes. We look forward to welcoming you again for our next broadcast. In the meantime, stay safe out there.